On time as promised.
He is the only soldier.
Freeze!
The only American.
Freeze, motherfucker, FBI!
Who is capable of taking them down.
We are going to be talking about the 80s homage action comedy movie Commando-ниндзя. This one is directed by Benjamin Coombs and stars Eric Carlesi, Philip Alia, oh god, lots of French people basically, whose names I'm not going to butcher. Now, before we get into the review, I have to tell you a little bit about how I discovered this film, because I have to give a shout out to fellow YouTuber and contributor to this channel, Buckaroobanzai, aka Ballistic Blood Bullets. Now, this film was actually a Kickstarter campaign where he actually gave some money towards, and he got the Blu-ray because of it. And you know, actually, because he lived quite near me, I actually saw it around his place, and we kind of watched it. And it's he being one of the backers, obviously got kind of like an early copy of it, and it's essentially a love letter to the action films of the 80s and 90s to a certain degree, which we'll kind of go on to. But it's one of these films, I would say, had it not been for Paul introducing it to me, I might have legitimately passed it by, thinking it was just a really obscure 80s action film, because the kind of the cover art and all that honestly does make it look like it genuinely is like an 80s action film. That this is kind of one of these ones that you see in the video shops and would never pay any attention to, sort of thing. But it isn't. It's actually a 2018 film made very much to look like an 80s film. Now, it's hard to describe this movie because it's kind of a spoof. But don't be thinking things like Scary Movie and Not Another Teen Movie. It doesn't go quite as far as that. I would say, if you've seen the movie Turbo Kid, and that's the nearest film I can suggest that this is near to. There's also that Kung Fury, which I guess is a little bit like this. So it's kind of like Turbo Kid, but a little bit more kind of meta than that, almost. So Turbo Kid you can kind of watch and believe the narrative to a certain degree. This goes a little bit further in regards to kind of like campiness and unbelievability, but not as far as movies like, you know, Not Another Teen Movie, Scary Movie, Meet the Spartans, all those sort of things. So it sits in between there. So the actual plot is more or less the plot of Commando mixed in with American Ninja by design. So we have this kind of ex-Vietnam vet set in 1986, well, most of the time. And we have this kind of ex-Vietnam vet, and we do get extended flashback sequences in Vietnam. And yeah, he's basically been told that there has been an attack on his home, and his ex-wife has been killed, and his young daughter has been kidnapped. And there is a guy, very much like the action movie Commando, that wants him to do a job for him, and he's got a daughter held kidnapped, and of course he doesn't agree, and kind of try and get a bloody revenge. And there's all these kind of ninjas, dinosaurs, all sorts of stuff kind of going on. But then we kind of have a bit more story to do with kind of like more of like an American Ninja style one, where we have this kind of like American guy getting kind of trained and in the kind of the art of ninjutsu and all of that. Then we even have a kind of more like a Mad Max little bit at the end as well. That's your kind of plot. So I have to say this is actually a French film, but it's kind of obviously made to emulate. It's a 2018 French film made to emulate American films of the 80s. There you go. Now, to watch this film and truly enjoy it, you have to be a fan of those films. You know, we're talking your prime Arnold Schwarzenegger, but even your less well-known stuff, you know, your Michael Dudikoff films, your Chuck Norris films, these sort of things, your direct-to-video stuff. Because this really is just reference after reference after reference. I mean, some of the ones you're going to get, like there's some really fun Predator and Terminator kind of like references, Jurassic Park. Like I said, we even get kind of like Velociraptors turn up. And there's like the Predator bits, for example, you can almost take straight out of Predator. But there's also a lot of references to things like maybe the direct-to-video kind of films that you got in the 80s. Obviously, this being called Commando-ниндзя, there's a lot of ninja here as well. And obviously, in the 80s, there was a big boom in kind of like ninja movies and stuff like that. And, you know, you'll see various kind of nods like Ninja 3 Domination posters and things like that in the background. But there's so many kind of small little references. I mean, I was reading a little bit about this movie before I did my review, and like when he goes to the bad guys' lair, all the bad guy sort of henchmen are wearing these blue soldiers and blue outfits, and apparently that's a homage to the video game Ikirai Warriors and things like that. So there's some real deep cuts here in regards to kind of pop culture references, but it does such a good job of lovingly kind of recreating those the kind of the films of the 80s and just plotting them into a kind of ridiculous proportions. The scenes where we actually have the actions are legitimately shot very well. There's a couple of really good martial arts scenes and kind of fight sequences that are very well choreographed legitimately and are actually great action sequences on their own rights. But then we have kind of like, we have plotting that, we have lots of people exploding into kind of like bloody messes, and it goes through some of the kind of the tropes that you might get in the 80s, you know, for example, where we have our hero just standing kind of like statically gunning down all the henchmen who are just running into the bullets and things like this. But for a relatively low budget, I think it was 35,000 euros or something like that, the budget of this one. It's so well done. I mean, it really is. And the references don't sort of, they're kind of incorporated into the story. So unlike a classic spoof film where it kind of stops, has a joke, and then kind of carries on, this one, the homages are more actually to do with the story. For example, without trying to spoil anything, but we have like the Predator and kind of Terminator characters. There are actually kind of characters. They're not just like a thing that goes, oh look, here's a pop culture reference. Those elements are incorporated into the actual story. So we do have a guy who's been, for example, like the Terminator, who has been reprogrammed. He's got like a Nintendo Power Glove on and stuff like that. And, you know, so it's actually kind of part of the story rather than just like, stop the film, here's the pop culture reference, kind of move on. So yeah, it's absolutely kind of loads of it. I think our leading guy as well is super charismatic and does a great job of recreating that kind of Rambo, Commando kind of look. And I think the director, I mean, this is actually his first feature. He's done a few films here, a few short films. But man, this guy absolutely nails it. I mean, it's such a companion piece, the Turbo Kid. And I love Turbo Kid, I really do. And you know, I enjoyed this movie probably nearly equally, maybe not quite as much, but nearly as much as I do Turbo Kid. And Turbo Kid is literally one of my favourite films now. Do I have any gripes to this film? I don't know if I would have got into the future with this film, to be honest with you. I just don't know. I know it's trying to incorporate a lot of the 80s kind of stuff, but I think Turbo Kid has already done that. And I don't think it was necessary, if you want my honest opinion. It was a fun sequence, and it's not much of it. It's kind of the last kind of like 15 minutes of the movie or so. But I would have maybe have kept it to the Vietnam era flashbacks and the 80s kind of like, you know, contemporary action there. I don't know, the future stuff I would have maybe kept to a sequel, because it just felt like Turbo Kid has already done this. Quite recently in the kind of the years before. It was a fun sequence, but I think they even kind of like play tribute to Turbo Kid in a way. I'm pretty sure I got that reference if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know. To me, it was maybe it diluted it a little bit for me. Other gripes for me are relatively minor. I mean, there's a couple of instances. I mean, the recreation of the 80s here is really impressive. The grainy kind of film stock, just the kind of like the establishing shots where everyone is kind of seemingly, you know, in full 80s gear. And I said to Paul, I think I must have used stock footage for this, because it really does look like 80s, but kind of it's incorporated so well into the actual film. But I don't know, it looks so good. With a couple of small exceptions, they break the kind of like the illusion just a couple of times. There's a scene where there's a guy in like the pool with all kind of like bikini babes all over the place, but all the girls have got like tattoos and piercings, and that wasn't really a thing in the 80s for women. So that was that's obviously a more modern thing, but and there's also a couple, you could really pick holes. I mean, there's a scene where the main character's daughter is playing with some toys, and there's some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles toys, but that didn't come out in the cartoon until 1987, so there wouldn't have been toys until then. If we're being picky, but that is really nitpicking. The only other thing, I mean, there was a couple, and this is done on purpose, but it's a decision I didn't particularly like, because there's a couple of people here who've got like real bad wigs on. For example, our Terminator character is wearing this really awful, deliberately awful wig, and there's a couple of other ones as well. Again, I don't really... Were bad wigs a thing in the 80s? I don't really kind of remember that being a thing, outside of a couple of stuntmen maybe in kind of action shots, but... I don't know, I maybe would have gone for more of a classic Arnie look, to be honest with you. I didn't really understand the kind of the bad wigs reference, to be honest, and I thought it just looked a bit crap. And this being a French-produced film, it was actually filmed in that language, but there is like an English dub, and it's done deliberately cheesy. They kind of overdubbed it, which does make it quite funny, but also I don't know if it will play well with everyone, if that makes sense. And that's the thing with this movie. I think it's, for fans of 80s movies, you will love this film. It is so well made, so funny, with legitimately good action sequences and memorable characters, but you really have to be a fan of the kind of the 80s movies. So if you're of a certain age, maybe, where you haven't really kind of grown up with those films, this kind of maybe just seemed like, why am I watching this? But for those of us who grew up with the kind of the action films of the 80s, my kind of age group and all of that, then this is definitely such a memorable love letter to the action films of the 80s that it's really worth a watch. So yes, there's some minor gripes I have, but overall this was such a fun film. I would absolutely recommend this to the majority of people who watch this channel. I really would. So I've seen the Kickstarter Blu-ray. I'm not quite sure when it will come out on general release, but yeah, I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully there will be a sequel. There is post-credit scenes, so please obviously stay to the end of the credits if you do watch this. So 8 out of 10, have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.